Good morning, guys. My name is Jada Gray, and today I'm going to be talking to you guys about what I researched this summer on tree growth response to precipitation and water availability. Is it? Okay. This is what I wish I had at the beginning of the summer. It's not a real book, but I wish I had Dendrochronology for Dummies. But instead, I started with this, and this is where I wanted to thank my mentors, Keith and Nick, for drawing this on my lunch bag the first day that we met and kind of dumbing it down for me. You know, I really appreciate it. So some background, I was able to collect my tree cookies from this nearby eco-tram. It's near the Continental Divide, and it's about 120 meters long. To summarize it, it's a big doohickey that goes across a 120-meter distance, and it measures all this other elemental stuff. But what I wanted to use for my presentation was the moisture measurement in the soil. So the tree cookies look like this. For the construction of the tram, they had to cut about 70 trees. So once they cut the trees, you can kind of see from an upper view, this is what it would look like. And so I cut a couple inches off of that. So in this tram, there's about 3 different biomes, each soil type ranging from dry to wet soil moistures. And when I mean dry, this is a great depiction of the 3 biomes. The dry is indicated by the colors yellow, orange, red, and then it goes all the way to the fern, which is about the really dark blues. And this is where I was able to derive my hypothesis, in that the best place for these trees to grow is actually in the middle, or what my mentor and I like to call the Goldilocks zone. And this is where the trees are able to grow their roots in the top drier layer of the soil, but can also go down in depth and get water when they need it. They have a lot faster rate of growth compared to the dry and wet portions of the tram, where they are more stressed. So these are some actual tree cookies that were taken from this site, and you can see, you know, the major difference. I bet you guys can't guess the age of these tree cookies. I'll give you a second. It's just in your head. So this one's 29 years old, this one's 52 years old, and this one's 72 years old. I know, crazy difference, right? But I'll explain why. So some background for the tree cookies, first and foremost. The dense tree rings indicate, you know, a wetter year or surplus of water, so rapid growth. And then the more narrow tree rings are usually identified as dry years, and that means a scarcity of water or slower growth. But this can also mean that the tree is going through a lot of stress from either too much water or too little water. The first year is usually in the middle of the tree cookie, and that's where all the other tree rings are able to grow upon. The last year, in this instance, the trees were cut down in 2021. So some more background about the soil itself. The dry soil, there's not enough water for these trees to grow in a fast rate, so they're really stressed out. Here, like I said, the Goldilocks area, they're able to grow really good roots on the topmost part of the soil, but can also go down in depth and get water when they need it. That means that they grow at a faster rate. And then the wet soil, what's really interesting about these trees is that they can't grow in the soil directly, because if they get too heavy, they'll fall over. So the trees here have to actually grow on top of other trees that have fallen in the past, or either a more densely packed piece of land, which is more sporadic over there. Here, the trees are really stressed, so they have a lot more narrow tree rings, and that's because there's too much moisture in the soil. And when I mean wet, this is a perfect example. It's literally a tree in a puddle next to a fallen tree. So my methodology, like I said, these tree cookies were collected from the stumps that were cut down. From there, I was able to wash off and sand those tree cookies and then put them in my scanner called the Windendro, where it can scan and date tree rings back to when they first originated. And from there, I was able to calculate the average ring width of each tree. And then I used data from this precipitation station near the Continental Divide as well. And it was a perfect correlation for me to be able to graph these data points so that I can see how trees react to precipitation in their different soil types. So like I said, I was able to grab the precipitation data from that station, and I only used the precipitation for the growing years in this example. I mean growing months, and so those are the months of May through August. And I made sure to look at the really wet years and the dry years as well, so I can correlate them to what I was looking at in the wind dendro scanner. And I made sure that the wetter years had more dense rings, and then the narrow rings were the drier years. So this is a good example, so that I was able to calculate the average ring width of each tree, but in this case, the dry portion of the tram, and use the data from the precipitation station and see how these trees reacted to precipitation. And you can see that as precipitation increases, so does the ring width of these trees. And that means as precipitation is given to this part of the tram, they take that time and they use it as their advantage and use that water up for their growth. This is for the transition area, or the Goldilocks zone. It has a lower R value, but it's still, the precipitation still helps them grow. And this is because the roots already have access to water down in depth, so they're able to get that water when they need it. So they're less susceptible to drought, and they can keep that really good tree ring width growth. This is actually really interesting. This is the wet zone. As precipitation comes into the wet zone, it actually negatively impacts the tree ring growth. And that's because the roots are already suffocating so much in water that, you know, it's not helping them more, it's hurting them more than helping them. So this is a really cool graph. It shows the age of each tree throughout the transect, and you can see that the younger trees are in the dry portion of the tram, and the older trees are in the wet portion of the tram. And that's due to fires, because fires can sweep through the drier parts of forest, but they can't bounce around the wet parts, the really moist soils, like I showed you in that previous picture. Some of these tree cookies were actually 160 years old. And 160 years old, that was about 1861, and that was before the Civil War. And this is a good example because this tree cookie is about 9.5 centimeters in diameter. So it's really small, but yet it's 160 years old. So in conclusion, my hypothesis was backed up by this research because it shows that in the transition area, the trees there are less susceptible to drought, as well as have a lot better growing rate compared to the dry and wet soil, where there's such thing as too much water or too little water for these trees to survive off on. And what Bob Ross would call these trees, happy little trees. So hopefully this research can help other researchers understand how trees react to climate change, as well as help future park managers know what resources to use for these parts of the forest. Hopefully even satellites can help, can use this radar, the same kind of radar, to look at the parts of the forest that have this Goldilocks soil so that they can put more resources and money into protecting those. And that's it. Thank you. Thank you.
We have time for one question while we switch over.
Yes.
What was the oldest tree that you found?
It was actually the one I just showed. Yeah, and I thought it was so interesting because it was so small. Yeah. It was because how stressed the tree was. It only grew like the really thin, narrow tree rings. So.